है रहबर मुल्क को कौम बता, है रहबर मुल्क को कौम बता, आंखें तो उठा नजरे तो मिला, कुछ हम बिसने हमको बिसना, ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा। है रहबर मुल्क को कौम बता, आंखें तो उठा नजरे तो मिला, कुछ हम बिसने हमको बिसना, ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा। धरती की सुलगती छाती के बेचैन शरारे पूछते हैं, धरती की सुलगती छाती के बेचैन शरारे पूछते हैं, तुम लोग जिन्हें अपना न सके वो खून के धारे पूछते हैं, तुम लोग जिन्हें अपना न सके वो खून के धारे पूछते हैं। सड़कों की जुबान चिल्लाती है सागर के किनारे पूछते हैं, सड़कों की जुबान चिल्लाती है सागर के किनारे पूछते हैं, ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा, ये किसका लहू है कौन मरा। है रहबर मुल्क को कौम बता, है रहबर मुल्क को कौम बता, आंखें तो उठा नजरे तो मिला, कुछ हम।
I would like to request our chief guest and speaker, Dr. John Cherian, to come to the dais. Also, I would like to request Janasamskriti President, Sri Shankar Narayanan, Joint Secretary, Dr. Hasina, please come on to the dais. Distinguished guests, friends and colleagues, good evening and a very warm welcome to all. This is the 39th AKG Memorial Lecture commemorating a great revolutionary leader, Comrade A.K. Gopalan, popularly known as AKG, who left us on this day, that is 22nd March 1977 in Kerala. Janasamskriti feels very happy and proud on the fact that we have been conducting this annual lecture for nearly past 4 decades without any interruption. I am sure for many of us here, AKG is a known personality, but we find it is our responsibility to introduce AKG to the new generation too. He was a great mass leader who always stood in the forefront to fight for the rights of the people, especially the underprivileged farmers and workers. I am sure AKG's name come to our minds when we again recently witnessed a great farmers rally which ended in a victorious note in Maharashtra. AKG, who was arrested by the British government, was in Vellore jail in Tamil Nadu when the nation celebrated independence. He hoisted the national flag in the jail on 15th August 1947. He was the first leader of the opposition bloc in the parliament. In parliament also he talked for the toiling masses and their rights. My English may be broken, but not the facts I place, is a famous quote by AKG. When we remember such a legendary figure who always raised his voice against all kinds of anti-people policies of the government, we ensure to select a topic which has contemporary relevance, and accordingly, we always reach out to the most well-versed person in that subject. This year, we have chosen the subject to be sanctions, tariff, the new grammar of America, which by all means has a significant place in the present situation. We also feel very proud and glad that we have the most suitable person, Dr. John Cherian, senior journalist and commentator, to deliver the lecture, who is an expert in the field of international politics. We have been experiencing the global impacts of Iran versus US-Israel conflicts, including in India, and now even our kitchens are suffering. I am not going into the details, as I am sure our speaker will shed light on this during his talk. I, on behalf of Janasamskriti and all of you, once again warmly welcome our guest, Dr. John Cherian. Also, I would like to welcome all of you, including our media friends. I will now request our President, Sri Shankar Narayanan, to preside over the program and proceed further. Thank you.
Dear friends, distinguished guests, and comrades, it gives me immense pleasure and deep sense of responsibility to welcome you all to this significant occasion, the 39th AKG Memorial Lecture organized by Janasamskriti. Since its inception in 1980, Janasamskriti has been committed to promoting democratic and progressive culture. in a city like Delhi, where diverse culture converge, such initiatives and interventions are not merely relevant, they are essential. Our efforts have always been directed towards harmonizing this diversity while nurturing the cultural expressions of all sections of the society. Over the last 4.5 decades, Janasamskriti has engaged in a wide spectrum of cultural activities, ranging from theatre festivals like Saptarashmi Drama Festival to seminars, discussions, lectures, and sports initiatives across Delhi and NCR. Through programs like Sargolsavam, we have reached thousands of young and emerging artists, fostering creativity, secular values, and a spirit of unity that transcends caste, creed, and religion. Friends, today we gather not only to continue a tradition, but to remember and draw inspiration from a towering figure in Indian public life, A.K. Gopalan, fondly known as AKG. Born in 1904 in North Malabar, AKG dedicated his life to the service of people. From the freedom struggle to the movement of workers and peasants, his life was one of the relentless commitment and sacrifice. He endured imprisonment multiple times, both before and after the independence. As a parliamentarian, elected to the first 5 Lok Sabhas, and as the leader of opposition, he transformed parliament into a powerful platform for voicing the concerns of the common people. In 1930, AKG participated in the Salt Satyagraha and underwent imprisonment, thus beginning his public life. The Hunger March conducted across Kerala following the Guruvayur Satyagraha, the Malabar March to support the responsible government movement in Travancore, and the Farmers March from Kasargod to Thiruvananthapuram in 1960 were all significant events that captured public attention. AKG played a leading role in the anti-untouchability movements such as Guruvayur Satyagraha and Paliyam Satyagraha. His hunger strike against the eviction of Amaravati is considered one of the historic events in Kerala. AKG was a communist who stood with the people, learned from the people, and led them. He was also the first person in India to be detained under the Preventive Detention Act. The case A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras remains widely discussed even today. AKG's passing came at a critical moment in India's history, soon after the infamous emergency and during a period of significant political transformation. Yet, his ideals continue to guide progressive movements even today. Comrades and friends, the legacy of AKG is closely intertwined with one of the most remarkable chapters in modern democratic history, the transformation of the first elected communist government in Kerala in 1957 under the leadership of Comrade E.M.S. Namboodiripad. That government demonstrated how governance can be used as an instrument of social transformation through landmark measures such as land reforms, free education, establishment of public healthcare system, and protection of workers' rights. It laid the foundation for an alternative development model rooted in equity, justice, and human dignity. This Kerala model stands today as a powerful example that challenges the notion of the right-wing capitalist communal fascist forces that there is no alternative to dominant economic paradigms. It asserts with conviction that another world is indeed possible. Today, as we look at the global situation, we find ourselves in a deeply complex and challenging environment. The world sees today is not a war between nations. It is a war waged by the imperialist forces and the capitalist system against the people of the world. We are witnessing a reconfiguration of power through economic sanctions, trade wars, and geopolitical strategies. These developments are not distant events. They directly affect the lives of ordinary people. Rising fuel prices, increasing cost of living, disruptions in essential supplies, and growing economic uncertainties are all consequences of these global dynamics. It is in this context that today's lecture assumes great significance. We are privileged to have with us Dr. John Cherian, senior journalist and distinguished commentator, who will deliver the 39th AKG Memorial Lecture on the topic Sanctions, Tariffs, the New Grammar of America. Dr. John Cherian is widely respected for his insightful analysis of international affairs and his deep understanding of global political economy. We are confident that his lecture will provide us with valuable perspectives on the changing nature of global power structures and their implications of countries like India. Friends, at a time when the world is confronted with growing inequalities and uncertainties, it becomes all the more important to resist the values that leaders like AKG stood for: commitment to the people, belief in democracy, and the pursuit of just and equitable society. Let this gathering not only be tribute to his memory, but also a reaffirmation of our collective resolve to carry forward those ideals. With these words, I extend my warm welcome to all of you once again, and I invite Dr. John Cherian to deliver the 39th AKG Memorial Lecture.
Thank you so much for inviting me to deliver this prestigious talk on the occasion of the death anniversary of the great AKG. It's such a great honor, and I've had, many of you don't know about this, but I've had the privilege of meeting AKG on a couple of occasions. Many of you are very young. I was a student in JNU, and Prakash Karat, the student leader there, he had gone underground during the emergency, and we were requested to go and look up Prakash's mother, who used to stay here in Vittal Bhai Patel House. So most of the time, AKG used to be there, and used to come there in the evenings, and I remember his very earthy sense of humor, so all the time smiling and laughing. So I have a very, very, very strong memories of our small interactions with him. His commitment to the anti-imperialism struggle is, of course, reflected in his political career and writing, and his great contribution to the communist movement in the country. I mean, I don't have to talk about it. I mean, the entire nation knows about it. So let's get to the topic at hand, which is about sanctions and tariffs, which is a tool to maintain America's imperial hegemony. The world's attention today is focused on the war imposed on Iran. It's a continuum of the imperial violence unleashed on the energy-rich region for decades. After draconian sanctions failed to bring about government change in Iran, the United States is now resorting to an all-out war to achieve its long-cherished goals. The United States and its ally Israel have been trampling on international law with impunity for a long time. But the current administration in Washington, encouraged by the Zionist regime in Israel, seems to have gone a step further than its predecessors. The Trump administration has been brazenly ordering military attacks on sovereign countries, riding roughshod over long-established international norms. Washington has reverted back to the old colonial and imperial play sheet. The Trump administration has officially revived the discredited early 19th century Monroe Doctrine and has declared that the entire American continent is within its sphere of influence. The US National Security Strategy Report released late last year forcefully asserts this pledge to reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore America's preeminence in the region. It's an official stand. The United States government is now resorting to the decapitation of leadership in countries which it considers hostile, hoping that a more planned leadership will emerge. You know what happened in Venezuela. I'm not sure whether the leadership is planned or not, but it is definitely playing ball with the Trump administration at this juncture. This strategy is being taken to the cruelest extreme in Iran today. The US and Israel, not satisfied with the assassination of the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the top military leadership in the first wave of attacks on Iran, has been further upping the ante by killing those who have now replaced them. The cold-blooded assassination of Ali Larijani, the secretary of the Supreme National Congress, along with General Ghulam Reza Soleimani, the head of the Basij force, by the US-Israeli forces, were part of the attempts at leadership decapitation. Trump, in his first term, had given ample indications that he cared little for international law or established diplomatic norms. The killing of the charismatic Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds force, on January 2020, on Trump's order while he was on a diplomatic mission to Baghdad, is an illustration. The Trump administration's so-called success in Venezuela, no doubt, encouraged it to try similar tactics in Iran. Israel and its strong domestic lobby in the US had a big role to play in instigating Trump to start the war, which has now engulfed the entire Gulf region and adversely impacted the global economy. Energy prices have shot up in most countries, the most affected being countries belonging to the global south. In his second term, Trump had ordered military attacks and intervention in 8 countries. The Trump administration doctrine seems to be destroy first and make deals later. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in a speech delivered at the Munich Security Conference in February, actually extolled the merits of European colonialism and Christian civilization. Nader Hashemi, a scholar of modern history in America's Georgetown University, has said that as a result of this nakedly imperial policies being pursued by the Trump administration, the consequences for international relations will be enormous, especially in the global south, where the global identity of nation states was formed in the context of the decolonization struggle against Western imperialism. America's infatuation with sanctions against sovereign countries which refuse to bow to its diktats started in the early part of the 20th century under the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. Wilson had said that a nation boycotted is a nation that is in sight of surrender. Apply this economic, peaceful, silent, deadly remedy, and there will be no need for force. It's a terrible remedy, Wilson had said. Wilson, during his term in office, initiated sanctions against Mexico, Germany, and some other countries, but the American sanctions in the pre-Second World War era were much limited in scale than the punitive sanctions the United States has been implementing after the start of the Cold War. Most of the American sanctions since the beginning of the Cold War were against the Soviet Union and the countries which were members of the Socialist Bloc. But adding tariffs as an additional tool to exert pressure on countries has been resorted again by the Trump administration after almost a century. The last important tariff act passed by the US was the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. According to historians, this passage of the act contributed to the economic downturn that followed in the wake of the Great Depression in the United States. Since then, the US has on several occasions instituted tariffs on allies and rivals alike. When the European Economic Community imposed tariffs on American chicken imports in 1960, Washington retaliated by imposing tariffs on European goods like wine and cheese. In 1982, there was a lumber war had erupted between the US and Canada. The lumber war is still ongoing. The Reagan administration instituted a tariff on Japanese automobiles. That was in 1987. Japan did not retaliate. It was the first Trump administration which started using tariffs in a big way to counter strategic rivals like China. In 2018, the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on 800 products from China. Beijing reciprocated with a tit-for-tat move. The first Trump administration had also imposed tariffs on its immediate neighbors, Canada and Mexico. But in his second term, President Trump has introduced across-the-board tariffs affecting the global community. The Trump administration's imposition of tariffs under the pretext of addressing issues like intellectual property theft, threats, and trade imbalances has strained America's relations with even its closest allies. After the end of the Second World War, the US and its European allies established international financial institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and WTO, laying the groundwork for a new international economic system through which Washington increased its influence. The IMF and the World Bank were used as instruments to spread the ideology of unfettered capitalism and liberalism in the newly independent countries that had emerged. For much of the 20th century, Washington and its allies had resorted to tried and tested methods of instituting regime change through direct intervention in the internal affairs of countries. In 1953, the CIA, in coordination with the British intelligence agency MI6, had orchestrated a coup against Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected leader of Iran. His crime was, the nationalization of British oil assets in Iran. In Guatemala, the government of Jacobo Arbenz was overthrown in 1954. Arbenz was planning to institute wide-ranging land reforms and take control of the huge swaths of land controlled by the American-owned United Fruit Company. In other Latin American and Caribbean countries, Washington used the senior military officers in the region to do their bidding and overthrow popularly elected governments. The brutal military governments in Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina were installed with the support of Washington. When the Americans failed to install pliant governments through coup d'etats and other means, they resorted to economic sanctions. In the last 7 decades, the US applied sanctions on various occasions on different countries more than 110 times. Currently, there are more than 20 countries under American sanctions. More than half of the world's population today is under American sanctions. The efficacy of American sanctions to bring about regime change was not as potent as Woodrow Wilson had envisaged, but it has played a significant role in destabilizing many countries in the past 70 years. They have helped to weaken the economic infrastructure and lower the standards of living of the populace of the sanctioned countries. US sanctions matter because the American dollar is the bedrock of our most international financial transactions. The key levers of global trade are also located in the Western financial capitals. Belgium is home to SWIFT, the global messaging network that enables bank-to-bank transfers. The P&I, Protection and Indemnity Club, provides 90% of the world's ocean-going tonnage with protection and indemnity insurance. This is based in the US and other Western countries. So President Trump in his second term had made tariffs a key foreign policy tool. Tariffs, like sanctions, are basically economic tools of coercion, though they are legally distinct under international law. The Trump administration had used secondary tariffs to achieve its geopolitical goals. The Indian government had to give significant concessions to Washington after the Trump administration initially imposed a 50% tariff. The concession including included a commitment to stop buying oil from Russia and bow out of an agreement with Iran to jointly develop the port of Chabahar. Indian tankers, part of the country's so-called shadow fleet, Iranian tankers, which were part of Iran's shadow fleet deployed to evade American sanctions, have been intercepted by the Indian Coast Guard. Of course, as you know, it was on the orders from the Trump administration. Tariffs and sanctions are now being viewed as a form of secondary warfare by many countries. Russia and Iran have found innovative ways of bypassing American sanctions by dealing in yuan and other currencies with third countries. The Iranian ships intercepted by the Indian Navy were not doing anything illegal. Bypassing American sanctions is not a crime. It's only illegal for Western companies to facilitate this transport under American law, American sanction law. As far as sanctions are concerned, India has first-hand experience under previous American administrations. The toughest was when the Clinton administration imposed after India tested its nuclear weapon in 1998. The Clinton administration cut off military aid, banned the export of dual-use technology, and opposed loans from the IMF and the World Bank to India. The Americans used the sanctions to leverage the BJP-led government to make compromises and shift India's foreign policy closer to the West. The UPA government, which followed, further deepened this relationship. India is now among the closest strategic partners of Washington in the region, being part of organizations like the Quad, which is a military grouping formed with the sole aim of confronting China. The strategic autonomy that was the hallmark of India's foreign policy has been seriously compromised, though India, like Israel, has been accepted as a de facto state by the West, de facto nuclear state by the West. American sanctions on India were only lifted in 2008, following the signing of the US-India civil nuclear deal. Today, under defense agreement, India has given access to its ports and airports to American ships and planes. India has been designated as a major defense partner by the United States. Only two countries have been given such a special two non-NATO countries have been given this kind of designation. The present Indian government claims to be following a policy of multi-alignment, having informally given up on non-alignment. After the US and Israel launched their attack on Iran, the Indian government refused to condemn it. The Indian Prime Minister was in Israel 3 days before the American war on Iran started. Addressing the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, Narendra Modi pledged India's continuing support to Israel. He said India stands with Israel firmly, with full conviction in this movement and beyond. Modi assured the Israeli Knesset, even as war clouds were hovering on the horizon. The Indian Prime Minister did not even bother to send a condolence message mourning the assassination of Iran's supreme leader. It took almost 4 days for a senior official from the Ministry of External Affairs to go and sign a condolence book in the Iranian embassy. I mean, at least the foreign minister should have gone to do that. The torpedoing of the Iranian ship, which had come to Visakhapatnam for naval exercises, I mean, the reaction of the Indian government to that was also very lukewarm. The ship was returning home after participating as a guest of the Indian Navy in an international fleet review. The ship was sunk just off the Indian coast. This way the Americans brought the war with Iran close to our borders. The ship sank just off the Indian coast. More than 80 Iranian sailors died. It took the Indian government more than 24 hours to issue a statement. There was no condemnation of the American action. It was only after the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which affected India's energy supplies, that the Indian Prime Minister thought it fit to speak to the Iranian President, Masoud Pezeshkian. The UN Human Rights Council has stated that the use of economic sanctions for political purpose violates human rights and the norms of international behavior. Such actions may precipitate man-made human catastrophes of unprecedented proportions. The most draconian sanctions that the Americans have imposed are on countries that dare to choose their own paths of development. When Chile elected a socialist president, Salvador Allende, in 1970, Richard Nixon, the American president at the time, ordered the CIA to make the Chilean economy cry. The decision was made within a week after Allende took office. Allende, a Marxist, had pledged to nationalize Chile's American-owned copper mines. Besides imposing economic sanctions, Washington spent more than $8 million in covert actions between 1970 to 1973 to destabilize the socialist government in Chile. The CIA also played a big role in the military coup that overthrew Allende. According to Peter Kornbluh, director of the Chile Documentation Project at the National Security Archive in Washington, the Nixon administration ordered the invisible blockade, the cutoff of international aid and assistance, stifling loans from the World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank, cutting off export credits from the United States, and obviously pouring money into the militant pro-coup opposition and expanding contacts with the Chilean military. This was done just a week after Allende took office. Socialist Cuba, and we know Cuba is under tremendous pressure these days. They have not received oil for the last, since the overthrow of since the capture of the Venezuelan president in the first week of January. Socialist Cuba has been under sanction since the triumph of the revolution. President John F. Kennedy implemented a full economic blockade on the country on February 1962, suspending all trade and prohibiting travel by the American citizens to the island nation. In 1982, President Ronald Reagan put Cuba on the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. For Cuba's support for liberation struggles in the African continent and for its support to left-wing movements in Latin America. This move prevented Cuba from accessing credits and loans in the international financial markets. The IMF and the World Bank were banned from providing loans to Cuba. The Torricelli Act, passed by the US Congress in 1992, further tightened the American blockade on Cuba. American-owned firms operating in third countries were barred from doing business with Cuba. The act, also known as the Cuba Freedom Act, also authorized American presidents to sanction countries that provide assistance to Cuba. The Clinton administration implemented the Helms-Burton Act, which aimed at discouraging non-American companies from investing in Cuba. When Cuba's tourism sector started expanding, the administration of George W. Bush implemented measures to prevent foreign banks from helping Cuba to use its hard currency to import food and other essential goods. The UN estimates that the economic damage to the country as a result of the blockade is in the trillions of dollars. Successive American administrations have kept on tightening the blockade. A slight thaw emerged between Washington and Havana during the second term of Barack Obama, but it evaporated soon after Donald Trump assumed the presidency. The Obama administration had removed restrictions on Americans traveling to Cuba and the remittances of dollars by Cubans in America to their relatives on the island. Cuba was also removed from the list of countries sponsoring terrorism, and 60 American companies signed business deals with Cuba. But the thaw only lasted just a couple of years, because once Trump took the presidency, he immediately reimposed the draconian sanctions on Cuba. In the beginning of the second term, Trump had made clear his intention to blockade Cuba into submission and effect regime change. He had torpedoed the tentative move between the two countries to establish full diplomatic relations and introduced 240 more sanctions in his first term. These sanctions included banning cruise ships. Cruise ships are very important for tourists to reach Cuba. Stopping direct flights from major American cities to Havana and imposing sanctions on ships carrying Venezuelan oil to Cuba. Tougher restrictions were imposed on money transfers from the US to Cuba. Cuba was again put on the state sponsors of terrorism list. International banks immediately stopped doing business with Cuba, fearing sanctions, American sanctions, penalties, and fines. Mainly as a result of the economic blockade, Cuba today is facing one of its worst crises. Since 2020, more than 2.7 million Cubans have left the island due to the hardship created by the sanction. The Trump administration's diktat to Cuba's traditional friends in the region, like Mexico, to stop supplying oil to Cuba after the ouster of President Nicolas Maduro in January, has made the situation more dire. Oil from Venezuela has completely stopped after the American intervention there. Trump's threats to slap punitive tariffs on countries supplying oil to Cuba has stopped even countries like Brazil and Colombia, both under left-wing governments, to come to the rescue of the beleaguered people of Cuba. The US is conducting international piracy on the Caribbean Sea, that is restricting and blocking the supply of oil to Cuba. This is what Cuba's ambassador to Venezuela recently stated. In one of his most outrageous statements in recent months, Trump said that Cuba is falling on his lap and that he will authorize his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to supervise the running of the country. He has been openly talking about having the honor of taking Cuba. He has also threatened the Cuban President Diaz-Canel with a fate similar to that of Nicolas Maduro if he does not resign. The Trump administration wants a regime compliance similar to what happened in Venezuela, in Cuba. This, of course, is easier said than done, given the Cuban people's history of resistance. Cuba tided over this special period that followed after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Socialist Bloc. With the sources of energy and food import cut off, Cubans those days tightened their belts to overcome their gargantuan problems. During the special period, which lasted from 1990 to 1995, Cubans on an average lost 9 to 14 kilograms in weight, body weight, as a result of the American sanctions. But the Socialist Republic survived the special period and emerged stronger. The international community is with Cuba. For the last 33 years, the UN General Assembly has been voting overwhelmingly for the lifting of the American economic blockade on Cuba. In the latest vote, only the US and its client state, Israel, voted against the resolution. Even Ukraine abstained. 187 countries supported the non-binding resolution. Iran was targeted by American sanctions from the very start of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. The United States had first tried to overthrow the new government, which had replaced the pro-American monarchy, by instigating an 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Washington and its allies in the Gulf, the rich monarchies, had given a blank check to Saddam Hussein to launch an invasion of Iran in 1980. The Iranian government at the time did not have many friends. Moscow and Baghdad, the Soviet Union and Iraq were strategic allies for a long time. More than 500,000 people on both sides were killed during the 8-year war. After the 8-year war ended in 1988, Washington's immediate focus on the region shifted to Iraq. Israel too had encouraged Washington to prioritize Iraq, claiming that Baghdad had an advanced weapons of mass destruction program and was on the verge of acquiring a nuclear weapon. Similar argument they've been making against Iran for the last 15-20 years. Israel had bombed an Iraq light water research nuclear plant in Osirak, built with French help in 1981. The invasion of Kuwait put Iraq under international sanctions, and the United States military saw to it that the sanctions were strictly implemented. A no-fly zone was imposed over Iraq by Washington. A comprehensive trade and financial embargo was imposed on Iraq. In 1991, following the passage of the American orchestrated Resolution 661 in the UN Security Council, Iraq had lost control of all its oil and gas revenues under the sanctions. The inhumane sanctions on Iraq were only lifted after the invasion of Iraq by the American forces in 2003. The sanctions on Iraq had led to the collapse of Iraq's advanced health sector, which was once the pride of the Arab world. UN agencies said that more than 500,000 children under the age of 5 may have perished as a result of the American-led sanctions. American sanctions against countries like Cuba, Iran, and Iraq banned the import of so-called dual-use items. Power and water treatment plants of Iraq were destroyed during the first Gulf War. They could not be repaired because of the ban on the import of dual-use items. Because of the inhumane sanctions policy, 59% of the Iraqi population were denied access to clean potable water, leading to outbreaks of cholera and typhoid among the most vulnerable sections of society. The American sanctions on Venezuela were strengthened during the second term of President Barack Obama. In 2015, Obama declared Venezuela as an unusual and extraordinary threat to US national security and laid the groundwork for the imposition of punitive sanctions targeted mainly at its oil industry. After Trump ascended the presidency, he made his first attempt at triggering regime change in Caracas. Virtually all sections of the Venezuelan economy were sanctioned. Venezuela's assets in the US were taken over. This was during the first Trump term. Venezuela was barred from the financial markets and from sourcing its gold reserves in foreign banks. Venezuela had about 31 tons of gold bullion stored in the Bank of England's vaults, but they were not allowed to withdraw it. Many of Venezuela's top leaders were blacklisted by the US State Department. At the beginning of his second term in office, Trump put a bounty on President Maduro's head, as well as on many of his close advisors and ministerial colleagues. A former UN rapporteur, Alfredo de Zayas, estimated over 100,000 deaths till 2020 as a result of the sanctions on Venezuela. Sanctions on the oil sector in 2019 slashed oil production drastically from 1.5 million barrels per day from 1.5 to 8 million Venezuelans had to leave their homeland because of the economic collapse triggered by the American sanction. Iran was never off the American radar, even though the Bush administration was preoccupied with Iraq. The Clinton administration had simultaneously implemented the Iran and Libya Sanctions Act in 1996 that put in place secondary sanctions on countries doing business with the two countries, with Libya and Iraq. In 2012, Washington imposed sanctions on Iran's central bank, effectively cutting the country off from international financial institutions. Iran got a brief respite from the sanctions after the signing of the Joint Comprehensive Peace Agreement, JCPOA, signed in 2015 when Obama was the president of the United States. From 2015 to 2018, the Iranian economy had grown by 6%. In 2018, 2 years after Donald Trump became president, the United States walked out of the JCPOA. Iran had given many concessions while agreeing to the JCPOA. President Obama told the American Congress that the nuclear deal with Iran contained the most comprehensive inspections and verifications regime ever negotiated to monitor a nuclear program. Despite this, President Trump tore it apart and implemented his maximum sanctions policy on Iran, targeting Iran's oil exports and its political and security apparatus. In February this year, the Trump administration announced 25% tariffs on countries trading with Iran. India had stopped purchasing discounted oil from Iran in November last year as soon as a new round of sanctions were announced. China, on the other hand, continued buying Iranian oil, undeterred by the threats of American sanctions. Despite the Iranian government engaging in diplomatic efforts to stave off a military conflict in the region, their country has once again been subjected to war. Senior Iranian officials had conveyed a degree of optimism when the recent negotiations were going on with the Americans. Iran had agreed to give significant concessions relating to the contentious nuclear issue. According to the Omani Foreign Minister Badr bin Hamid Al Musaidi, who was privy to the talks, Tehran had agreed to permanently degrade its stock of enriched uranium, along with the reassurance that it will never opt for nuclear weapons, which it has been saying so, for a very long time, that it will never opt for a nuclear weapon. The Iranians, of course, had the least trust in the current American administration. After all, the Americans had attacked Iranian nuclear facilities in June last year in coordination with Israel during the 12-day war, even as negotiations were going on between Trump and Washington, with Tehran and Washington. Besides, Donald Trump, in his first term, had ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, the charismatic Iranian general who had played a very big role in expanding Iran's influence in the region and in fighting the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. After the recent protests which broke out in Iran, one of the most widespread since the 1979 revolution, President Donald Trump had again amplified his calls for regime change in the country and threatened to use military force to achieve this goal. There is a growing evidence that the Americans had a role to play in the widespread street protests that erupted at the end of the last year in Tehran and other cities of Iran. The portrait of Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of the late Shah of Iran, was prominently displayed by sections of the protesters in cities like Tehran. The Shah was reinstalled in power in 1953 by the United States and the United Kingdom after the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, the popularly elected leader of Iran. It was the first coup orchestrated by the CIA and MI6 to retain control of energy assets in the third country. The Mujahideen-e-Khalq, MEK for short, which is also supported by Western intelligence, it's an Islamist, they call themselves Islamist Marxists, also played a big part in fomenting the deadly violence which lasted for almost 2 weeks in Iran. The MEK was once branded a terrorist organization by the Western government, but now gets open support from the West and Israel. The MEK is claiming that 1,499 of its members were killed in the protest. During the 8-year war Iran fought with Iraq, the MEK had fought on the side of Iraq. That war itself was instigated by Washington. The war, which started just a year after the overthrow of the Shah, was instigated from Washington. During the last round of protests, a small but vociferous section of the protesters had for the first time also called for foreign military intervention to bring about regime change. Reza Shah's closest advisors had said that American military intervention is inevitable. Reza Shah, speaking on the sidelines of the Munich conference, which took place in February, had urged the Trump administration not to waste time on negotiations and to speed up plans for a military attack. More and more information about the involvement of the West in the violent events of January is coming out. The Wall Street Journal has reported that more than 6,000 Starlink terminals were purchased by the US State Department and were smuggled into Iran after the demonstrations broke out and the curtailment of the internet was curtailed by the government. An official Mossad account urged Iranians, Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, urge Iranians to take to the streets, declaring that we are with you in the field. Israel's Channel 14 said that foreign actors are among the protesters, and that is the reason why hundreds of regime personnel were killed. Trump himself has been urging protesters to take over institutions of government. He encouraged them by saying that the US was locked and loaded, quote unquote, to protect the protesters. The American and Israeli military intervention came 2 months later, but by all accounts, the majority of Iranians have chosen to rally behind the flag of the Islamic Republic. The main reason why the Iranians took to the street was to protest against the dire state of their economy. Decades of draconian American sanctions had taken their toll. American officials have not shied away from taking credit for driving the Iranian economy off the rails. the American Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told the US Senate that what the Trump administration had done was to create a serious dollar shortage in Iran. He said that this led to the collapse of one of Iran's biggest banks. The central bank had to print money. The Iranian currency went into a free fall. Inflation exploded, and hence we have seen Iranian people out on the streets. And this is what Bessent said, Scott Bessent, the American Treasury Secretary. Mike Pompeo, during his stint as American Secretary of State in the first Trump administration, told the BBC that if Iranians want their people to eat, then they will have to give into American demands. Research papers published in Western academic journals have shown that the draconian American sanctions have had a very adverse impact on the Iranian middle class. Without the sanctions, the middle class would have expanded by 17%. From 2011 to 2019, 9 million middle class Iranians were pushed into poverty. The 2 years, 2014 to 2016, during which the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, remained in force, the Iranian, I mentioned that, the Iranian economy had grown by 6%. The Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian had said that the US and its partners rode on our problems, quote unquote, and are continuing to seek the fragmentation of Iranian society. Iran was prepared for the worst. They had ramped up their ballistic missile production since the war in June. The late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as well as senior military officials, had warned that if their country is subjected to attacks, all American bases in the region would be targeted. They should know that if they start a war this time, it will be a regional war. Khamenei had warned, had predicted, and this is exactly what has happened. Iran's leadership since the time of Imam Khomeini has insisted that the country's nuclear program is purely for peaceful purposes. The Iranian president had once again reiterated just before the American and Israeli attack that his country was ready for any verification of its nuclear program. Iran's atomic energy chief Mohammad Eslami has said that if the economic sanctions are lifted, Iran is willing to dilute its 60% enriched uranium to a lower level. Iran is said to have between 400 to 600 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, which is more than enough to make a bomb if they want to. It was President Trump who ordered the withdrawal of the United States from the JCPOA, under which Iran had agreed to cap its enrichment program, reduce its stockpiles, and scale down its nuclear infrastructure in exchange for sanction waivers. The Biden administration continued with the maximum pressure tactics of the Trump administration with regard to Iran. It was after the unilateral and illegal American withdrawal from the JCPOA and the full restoration of sanctions that Iran had made a decision to enrich uranium up to 60%. The sanctions were imposed to create hardships for the people and social instability. The instability that was caused by the sanctions have been now weaponized by the West. The American desire for regime change in Iran should not be viewed as in isolation with what is happening in the region. Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, in a recent speech said that Israel wants all its neighbors to be weakened so that it could continue with its expansionist program. Iran is one of the few countries in the region that is standing resolutely against the Zionist project. In fact, Iran's current geostrategic predicament is a direct result of what happened on October 7, 2024, when Hamas launched its attack on Israel. Iran had no knowledge of about the planning or the timing of the attack. The Hamas leadership, in fact, had a strained relationship with Iran for a long time. They were on opposite sides during most of the Arab Spring period. But when it became clear that Israel was intent on genocide in Palestine, Iran did not stop its allies like Hezbollah and the Houthis from joining the fight against Israel. The Hezbollah militia paid a heavy price. The instability caused by the war in Gaza also played a role in the fall of the Assad government in Syria. Syria was a long-time ally of Iran. The powerful axis of resistance that Iran had assiduously created after the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 had suffered a serious blow. The new war of choice America is waging on Iran in coordination with Israel does not show signs of ending soon, although yesterday Trump said that he's planning to end the war soon, but at the same time he said that he's talking about putting American military boots on the ground. Iran has learned lessons from the 12-day war, which happened last year. Facing an existential threat, Iran had now closed the Strait of Hormuz. Gas output from Qatar and oil production and exports from the Gulf states have been severely affected. Price of petrol has now gone up even in the United States, which is the world's largest oil producer. And the global economy could be even more severely impacted if the war drags on. The Americans find themselves being pulled into yet another quagmire in the region. Iranians are used to protracted war and suffering. The death toll in Iran is mounting by the day. 160 girls, as you know, were killed in an American attack on a school in the town of Mina. Iran has strong diplomatic support from China, Russia, and most of the BRICS countries. President Vladimir Putin characterized the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's killing a cynical violation of all norms of human morals. China has said that the killing was unacceptable. Russia and Iran have agreed had signed a comprehensive strategic peace treaty in 2025, but the treaty, however, does not have a mutual defense clause. But according to reports, Russia is helping Iran militarily by telling them about the positions of Israeli and American military in the region. Some Western academics have given the example of South Africa as a case study where the implementation of sanctions achieved the laudable goal of dismantling the apartheid regime and ushering multi-party democracy. First of all, sanctions on the racist regime of South Africa were multilateral, not just sanctions imposed by the United States. In fact, the US and the United Kingdom supported the apartheid regime almost till the very end. The ANC was branded as a terrorist organization by both the Reagan and Thatcher governments. The terrorist tag on Nelson Mandela was only lifted by the United States government in 2008. International sanctions did have a limited impact on the apartheid government. It was isolated on the global stage, but it was a decisive defeat of the South African army in the Battle of Cuito Cuanawale against a combined Cuban-Angolan force in 1988 that was the turning point. At the time, the South African army was the strongest on the African continent. After defeat, the South Africans were forced to withdraw from Angola and to give into the demands for the independence of Namibia. It was the decisive Battle of Cuito Cuanawale that played a role in the final collapse of the apartheid regime. American and Western sanctions played a role in weakening the secular Republican governments in the Arab world. But in the end, it was military intervention by outside powers led by the United States that was decisive in bringing about regime change. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist government held on despite almost a decade and a half of punitive sanctions. But finally, the Americans had to resort to a full-scale military invasion to achieve their immediate goal. In Libya, the US and its European allies had imposed wide-ranging sanctions, including on oil exports and financial transactions in 1986. Libya's support for liberation movements and groups like the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, earned it the terrorist tag from the American government. Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan leader, had to make major concessions, including payments of hefty reparations and a pledge to dismantle its WMD program to get the American sanctions lifted. Washington lifted the sanctions on Libya in 2004 and had removed the country from the terrorist list. The West, however, used the Arab Spring protests that rocked West Asia and the Maghreb region to once again target the Republican governments in the region. The crackdown on protesters, many of them encouraged and financed by conservative monarchies, gave the administration of President Obama the pretext to impose even further sanctions on these countries. The Libyan government assets in foreign banks were frozen, and the Libyan National Oil Corporation was not allowed to export its oil. Revenues from oil were Libya's primary source of revenue. But the Libyan government could only be toppled after NATO militarily intervened in the country with the UN mandate for protecting civilians. It took the Western Alliance over 8 months to achieve their real goal of achieving regime change. The country remains divided with militias and warlords now ruling the roost after the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi. There is a nostalgia now for the Gaddafi era. When his son Saif al-Gaddafi was assassinated a couple of months ago, his funeral was attended by huge numbers of people, and he was at that time the most popular figure in the country. The secular Ba'athist regime in Syria withstood decades of American and Western sanctions, but was finally hollowed out by the decade-and-a-half-long internal conflict instigated by the West in tandem with its regional alliance like Turkey and the conservative Gulf monarchies. When the sanctions could not do the job, Washington did not think twice about arming and financial radical jihadi groups, including those formerly affiliated to Al-Qaeda. The current president of Syria is a former functionary of the Ahmad al-Shara. President Ahmad al-Shara was once the leader of the Al-Qaeda affiliated Al-Nusra Front. The West had embraced him, though many of Syrians, especially those belonging to the minority Alawite and Druze communities, have not reconciled to the idea of an Islamist taking over a country that was a bastion of secularism and multiculturalism in the region. The events of the last few weeks show that sanctions can boomerang on the oppressor. The blockade of the Straits of Hormuz can be viewed as a form of counter-sanctions by a beleaguered country against its enemies. Iran has turned a key choke point in the world economy into a weapon. 20% of the world's oil and gas and 1/3 of the global fertilizer trade flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Washington has now been forced to temporarily lift sanctions on the sale of Iranian oil by its shadow fleet. Trump has also signaled that he is planning to end the war soon and has been talking about regime change, and he has not been talking about regime change for some days at least. Iran, Russia have shown that the era of American domination in economic warfare can't go on much longer. Thank you very much for listening so patiently.
Thank you so much for delivering the 39th AKG Memorial Lecture. Now we have few minutes to interact with the chief guest on the subject. Anybody has any questions can raise your hands and ask the questions.
How do you read the silence of Arab bird in this specific issue? Not only in the Arab bird silence in Iran, Israel conflict, and also in the Gaza issue. How do you see that?
What will be the long-term consequence of the American aggression? The US power, US dominance in economic dominance and military power is going to decline, or is the US going to gain?
I am Nanda Kumar. Coming to the current Israeli-Iran war, we hear that We hear that in Tehran there is a timer clock which says that Israel will be eliminated by so and so date. And also we hear that maybe Iran may be into funding Hezbollah, Houthis, maybe even Hamas. In that context, how can we singularly fight forth with Israel? That's it.
Now this, everybody is aware of the effect of American sanctions. Do you see any consolidation of global south? See, when they go for this much tax sanctions against, see, so many countries, is there any chance of retaliation?
Yeah, first question, the silence of Arab states and Islamic countries. Unfortunately, if you look at the map, most of the Arab states are either militarily dominated by the Americans or economically dominated by the Americans. Now, Egypt is one of the biggest and strongest Arab state, but it's so dependent on the United States and the Gulf monarchies for its survival that it's not capable of taking an independent stance. And the Gulf Arab monarchies, I mean, they're so dependent on America, not only the American military but also on Western global finance, that they can't afford to take a stand which goes against the Americans. And all the Gulf monarchies have big American bases on the territories. So, I mean, Iran is, that's one reason Iran is for attacking the Gulf monarchy, the states like the UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar. You should remember that Israel had attacked Qatar last year, and there was hardly any reaction from Qatar. And when Qatar was under a blockade, Qatar itself was under sanctions from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE for a couple of months. They had threatened to, take over Qatar, but it was only Iran which supported Qatar in those days. So yeah, I mean, the Arab states have really, I mean, their leadership, the people on the street, I'm sure, and I mean, all indications are that they are with Iran, but the ruling classes are totally, now joined on the hip with the United States. The second question was, the US, I think everybody and most international commentators and experts say that the United States is a power in decline, and probably this war with Iran will be a decisive one, because I think it is one of the worst setbacks America has received since they lost the war in Vietnam. Iran's stranglehold on the Straits of Hormuz gives it a terrific grip on the global economy, and there's nothing much Americans can do. I mean, they can't go and forcibly open the straits, because the straits at its narrowest is about only 20 miles wide, and Iran has a chokehold on that area. So, since the last couple of years, and especially after the formation of BRICS, there has been an effort to do your trading in currencies like the yuan and the ruble. And for instance, Iran does most of the trade in yuan. So also does India. Also does a little bit of its trade in yuan. BRICS has been the BRICS grouping has been saying that BRICS countries should not stick to the dollar, and that's one reason why Trump has been threatening BRICS. So I definitely think that the American economic power is in decline, and the dollar is, in a way, dependent to a large extent on China. I mean, if China ups the ante, the dollar could lose much of its value, because people say the dollar is, is not backed by any gold reserves. It's a paper currency, so things can happen. The third question is, the timer talk. Oh yeah, I've been to. Sorry, I've been to Tehran many times. My last visit was 2 years ago. I have never heard of this timer clock existing. Nobody has ever even jokingly told me about this timer clock. So no, there's no such thing. What is the second question? After the American invasion of Iraq, 2003, the Iranians knew that after Iraq falls, the next target is going to be Iran. The Americans would focus on Iran. So they went about building this axis of resistance, which includes militias in Iraq, who are also now fighting against the Americans, the Sikh government in Syria, and Hezbollah. And later on, the Houthis. The Houthis only came up, much later. So they constitute the so-called axis of resistance, and ideologically they are very cohesive, and they said that their main enemy is Israel, and they will fight for the creation of a state of Palestine. They never said that they are going to destroy Israel. I mean, the axis of resistance said that the Palestinians should be given their right. And this axis of resistance had become a very powerful force. And they lost some of their power after the Hamas forces invaded Israel. But what's happening today shows that even the Hezbollah, which the Israelis had claimed was completely destroyed, they are still a fighting force. They were trained by Iran. They were funded by Iran, and they are also religiously, they have something in common. They're all Shiites. They all except Hamas. Hamas is Sunni. So that's why Iran's relation with Hamas was always a little tentative. Hamas sided with the jihadis during the Arab Spring. But then for Iran, I think the liberation of Palestine is one of the top priorities. India's position on this issue, I talked about it. Right from the beginning of the Iranian Revolution, India's relationship with Iran was, it wasn't bad, but it was not as warm as it was with, say, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or with Egypt, because India viewed Iran as a kind of religious kind of a zealot. The leadership as being religiously very extreme. But India and Iran have long, historical, cultural relations. So, and the people of Iran really look up to India, even the government there. Not that they are desperate for India's friendship, but they want to balance, their relationship with China. They don't want to be overly dependent on China. And India is actually not an immediate neighbor, but a neighboring country. If there was no partition, India would have been sharing a border with Iran. So in India, but even the UPA government was very, didn't side with Iran on crucial issues, especially on the nuclear issue. And when the BJP government came, the relations became even, went down the hill even further. But the two countries had signed an agreement to develop the Chabahar port, which is very important. But India and the Iranians really wanted India to speed up the development of Chabahar. But India was always very wary. looking at Washington, whether Washington would approve. And India took its own time, but I think India finally gave about $5 million for the development of the port. But once Trump issued his ultimatum, India immediately withdrew. So India has strategic relations with all the countries in the region except Iran. So, and now we know after the why didn't Modi have to go to Tel Aviv 3 days before the war on Iran? Everybody knew that America and Israel were preparing to attack Iran. And then he makes a statement that we are with you, not today, forever, kind of thing. I mean, what is Israel? Israel is a tiny little country. What is the population of Israel? 12 million, 11 million. And what does it give you? It only gives you arms and technology to spy on other people, on your domestic population. I mean, this kind of equipment and technology you can get from other countries. But India, the Indian leadership, right from even in the UPA days, has prioritized relations with Israel over that of Iran. The last question is yeah, global. We thought that the BRICS, groupings like the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization would bring about more solidarity among the nations of the South. But unfortunately, this has not happened. I mean, the conflict with Iran's, America's and Israel's attack on Iran, very few of the BRICS countries have openly condemned it, except for Brazil and China and Russia. Nobody has condemned it. And even, BRICS today, one of the member countries of BRICS is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And the United Arab Emirates has nothing really to do with the global South. The United Arab Emirates is virtually the 51st state of the United States of America. You can do your immigration to America if you through Abu Dhabi. You land Abu Dhabi, you get your American immigration from there. So, I mean, it's going to be difficult. There's no real unity among the countries of the South. I mean, they get immediately threatened. I mean, all the countries of the global South succumb to American pressure on the tariffs issue. And not that they could not do much because their economies are weak. And India also, in a way, most of its exports are to the United States, and it has a huge NRI population there. So, I mean, the governments in the global South prefer to put most of the eggs in the American basket even now. Thank you.
Sir, my name is Venu. My question is, Iran's refusal to stop their nuclear program is the apparent reason for the present conflict. And my question is whether Iran required the nuclear program, because they are stating that their program is for peaceful and basically energy. But nuclear energy is much more costlier than the other forms of energy, whether it is because Iran has the largest reserves of natural gas and crude oil. So whether they require, but it is a fact that they don't require. Iran does not require nuclear energy for electricity. Even then they are, suppose if America is claiming that they are just months away from the nuclear bomb. If Iran had been successful in making that nuclear bomb, who would have been at the risk? Because Iranian missiles cannot reach America, but they can definitely reach Saudi Arabia and UAE. And it is no secret that Iran has set its eyes on Mecca and Medina. Because now Saudi Arabia is the undisputed leader of the Islamic world just because they have got Mecca and Medina. And Iran has a dream of becoming the leader by capturing Mecca and Medina. If Iran had successfully making the nuclear bomb and attacked the UAE, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and captured Mecca and Medina, who would have stopped them?
Iran always had a peaceful nuclear program. It started from the time of the Shah of Iran. And when the Shah of Iran was there, all the countries virtually rushed to Iran to help them, a peaceful nuclear program for medicine, for energy, not for making a bomb. India also the Indian Atomic Energy Corporation also helped the Shah of Iran in his nuclear program. But once the Shah fell, the attitude towards Tehran changed. And you must remember that Tehran, Iran is a NPT, signatory of the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the nuclear if you sign the NPT, that means you are not allowed to, you're not allowed to make a bomb, nuclear weapon. India and Israel and Pakistan, which are nuclear weapon power today, were not NPT. They never signed the NPT. And they, made the nuclear bomb. But Iran is a signatory of it. And from the times of the first supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, and the leader who was killed, Khamenei, both of them have been repeatedly saying that it is against our beliefs to have a nuclear weapon. They want their program. They say as a sovereign country and as a signatory of the NPT, they should be allowed, to develop a nuclear, the nuclear industry, because Iran is, most of Iran is desert, arid, and they need this, for producing electricity. For instance, Tehran now has even before the American attack, had a serious water and electricity shortage problem. So they need, like all NPT signatories, they want to develop a nuclear program. They have been giving reassurances and assurances that they are not going to make a bomb. And Iran had very good relations with all its neighboring countries. Iran and Saudi Arabia had signed a peace agreement 2 years. The Chinese had supervised that. They had gone to Beijing, the leaders of Iran and Saudi Arabia, and had signed a peace agreement. As I said in my earlier, that Iran helped Qatar, against attacks, protected it from the Saudis and Emiratis and the Bahrainis who threatened to attack Qatar. They had very good relations before this war started with the neighbor. And everything was normal. In fact, all the Gulf monarchies were pleading with America, please don't open a front in our region. We are happy as we are. So I don't think Iran posed a threat to anybody in the region, except, of course, Israel. And Israel was hell-bent. Israel has been saying that Iran has been on the verge of getting a bomb for the last 25 years. As soon as Netanyahu became prime minister in 1998 or something, he started saying Iran is about to, another 15 months, Iran is going to make a bomb. They have been crying wolf for a long time. And if I were in Iran's place, I think I should make a bomb, because a nuclear bomb is the only guarantee against imperialist countries like America. You think America would have done what it dared to do now if Iran had a nuclear weapon? No.
Good evening, sir. My name is Dhanush. So my question is, we have somehow reached a geopolitical bottleneck right now. We are seeing multiple problems throughout the world. For example, there is Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Palestine, and different problems that are happening right now. So my question is, could this be the next reason for some sort of coalition-based, full-fledged world war or something like that? Is that possible for our cause?
Yeah, a lot of people have been saying that we are on the verge of another world war. But I don't think so, because the war which America has chosen to wage, America and Israel have chosen to wage against Iran. They are totally isolated. None of their allies none of the Western allies are supporting America, despite all the threats being being given by Trump. But I don't think that the world, anybody wants a new war. I mean, because a new world war will be the last war for the planet, because it will be a nuclear war. And I don't think anybody, none of the big powers, I think China is on the, is playing a, wait and watch game. I mean, it is just waiting to emerge as the superpower on par with America. And I think if a multipolar world emerges, chances of another global war will diminish. And I think it is slowly but surely emerging. So I don't think we really have to worry, unless a crazy leader like Trump uses a nuclear weapon in some part of the world. Then, of course, but I don't think. I think better sense will prevail, inshallah.
Sir, what if I try to draw a comparison between Indo-Pak conflict and Israel-Iran conflict? In the background of, say, Kargil surgical strike, Pahalgam Operation Sindhu, Hezbollah Houthi epic fury.
Kind of a picnic, or as Trump would say, was an excursion compared to what's happening now between Iran, Israel, and America. I mean, that is a full scale. I mean, this Operation Sindhu lasted for how many days? I mean, it was. This war is much wider in scope. Iran is sent one of its missiles to Diego Garcia. I don't think the Operation Sindoor escalated to that kind of a level. And in Iran already about 2,000 people have been killed in the war on Iran. While Operation Sindoor were much smaller in scale. I don't think there is any comparison. And it's already been 3 weeks since the war on Iran has started. So, yeah, it was much wider in scale, what's happening in the Gulf. And that Operation Sindoor was a war between India and Pakistan. This is a war between Iran and two of the biggest, most powerful armies in the world. Israel is the most powerful army in the region, and America, of course, has the strongest army in the world. So yeah, it's a real David versus Goliath struggle. Thank you.
Actually, this war is really very serious between Israel and Iran. But at the same time, we can see something which is not reported really seriously between Israel and Lebanon, because all of southern Lebanon and Golan Heights have already been taken by Israel. Same way, part of the Palestine, for example, West Bank is already been taken by Israel. So could you just explain a bit more about this silent war which is happening there?
I mean, I think more people. It's not a silent war. I mean, more people have been killed in Lebanon than in Iran after Israel opened a front against Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is a Shiite organization. About 40% of Lebanon's population is Shia. They are the underprivileged in Lebanese society. They didn't have much of a say. But in the 1990s, Israel had occupied parts of Lebanon with the support of the Americans. And so the resistance, that's when this resistance movement started, Hezbollah. And of course, it started after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. And the aim was to resist Israeli expansion into Lebanon. So their first act was, there was a suicide bomb attack against an American military base in Lebanon when Ronald Reagan was president, and about 200, more than 250 American soldiers were killed in that attack, and that made the Americans withdraw from Lebanon. But Israel continued occupying Lebanese territory, and so the first war with Hezbollah was started in 2006. The Israeli army invaded to crush Hezbollah, and for the first time, the Israeli army had to retreat. It was militarily a defeat. The Hezbollah managed to defeat this thing. Since then, Hezbollah has been growing in power, and the Iranians have been, of course, training, helping, financing, sending their officers there. It became a fighting force to reckon with, and that is why the Iranians, when I was in Tehran, they told me that last couple of years ago, that we are not worried. We have a front, we have a border with Israel. The Iranian top officials were boasting, but in the sense because Hezbollah, they consider Hezbollah part of their army. So and they had state of the art, and what the Iranians had supplied them with their state of the art missiles and munitions. So the Iranians were very confident, but after the Hamas attack on Israel, and as you know, Hezbollah decided to support Hamas, although ideologically, they are not on the same. Hamas, is more Sunni Islamist, while Hezbollah is Shia. But for the sake of the Palestinian cause, Hezbollah decided to support Hamas, and this gave the Israeli army the opportunity to flatten. While they were flattening Gaza, they also turned their air force and army against the Hezbollah position, and for months they started bombing Hezbollah army positions, and they managed to kill the charismatic leader of Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. He was he had a stature almost like the Iran supreme leader, Khamenei. He was very charismatic. And before that, the Israelis are very smart. They had infiltrated the Hezbollah, like they had infiltrated Hamas. I remember one Palestinian telling me every second Palestinian is an informer for Israel, because they give you a lot of money. They if you don't cooperate with them, you can't get access to the hospitals. There are many levers, and Hezbollah was badly infiltrated. You remember the story about the transistor bombs? Not transistor, sorry, the phone bombs. Anyway, so they were degraded, but Israelis overplayed the hand. They thought that Hezbollah was totally destroyed. That was not the case, as has been proven now. Today, Hezbollah is standing its ground and firing back at Israeli positions in Israel, within Israel, and Israel has sent its army to capture land in territory in Lebanon, but they are making very slow progress because the resistance has been very strong from the Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is a power to reckon with even now. I think it has to end soon, because the global economy is going down the tube. Even in our neighboring countries, they already raised the price of petrol and gas. Mr. Modi is not doing so because of the elections which are going to take place. New Zealand is running out of, even their allies are telling them, please stop. So I think Trump is trying to get an off-ramp, and he's already said that we have achieved most of our goals, because he has not stated what his goals are. First he said it is regime change, then he said no, it's to cap the nuclear weapons program, then he said that it was to destroy the leadership. So he has not stated what his goal is. So he can say, I have achieved my goals, I stop. We stop. Yesterday he made a statement saying that we have achieved most of our goals. So, but then of course he says, I may even send troops to open the Straits of Hormuz. But I don't think it cannot go on, because it's going to be, devastating not only for the South, but also for the developed countries. Even, yeah, because the most important thing for Trump is the midterm elections in the end of this year. Right now, most of the Americans are vehemently against what he's doing in Iran. Even his base is turning. His evangelical Christian base has also started asking questions. So he has to, I mean, everybody knows that he committed a huge blunder by what he has done. So I think my prediction is that within a few days the war should end. But at the same time, Iran has said that the war will only end when we want it to end. You started it. Now, we will decide when to end it. So I don't know. I hope it will end soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we can conclude here. Thank you so much for raising the very, very relevant questions here. And it was a very good interaction also. Now I request Dr. Hasina Join, Secretary of Janasamskriti, to conclude the session.
Good evening, everyone. As we come close of this session, I would like to offer vote of thanks for today's 39th AKG Memorial Lecture on Sanctions, Tariffs, the New Grammar of America, delivered by Dr. John Cherian, organized by Janasamskriti. On behalf of Janasamskriti, I extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Cherian for his enlightening and thought-provoking address. We are indeed fortunate to have had such a distinguished and engaging speaker for this year's AKG Memorial Lecture. Of course, his incisive analysis of global economic strategies, particularly the role of sanctions and tariffs in shaping contemporary American policy, has offered us valuable perspectives on the changing contours of international relations. Thank you, sir. I would also like to express our heartfelt thanks to the President of Janasamskriti, Sri V.V. Shankaranarayan, for chairing this session and for the valuable insights added. Our sincere appreciation also goes to the General Secretary of Janasamskriti for the warm welcome address that set the tone for today's program. I extend our gratitude to our distinguished guests, media friends, and participants for the active engagement and your gracious presence that greatly enriched the session. I would also like to thank distinguished authorities of Constitutional Club for providing this venue for today's lecture. Finally, I thank you, each one of you, for being here as part of this AKG Memorial Lecture. Thank you.